So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our Let's Talk Study with US series titled Preparing for Your University Admission Interview. My name is Umara Daud and I'm an Education USA advisor with Islamabad office in Pakistan. I have a master's degree in international education policy from Columbia University and joined Education USA 6 months ago. Today's session is for everyone who is interested in learning more about college admissions, interview process, and how to prepare for the interview and present themselves in the best way possible. Before we start, a little bit about who we are. Education USA is a global network under the US Department of State, comprising over 425 international student advising centers in more than 175 countries. We are your official source of US higher education. We provide accurate, comprehensive, and current information about opportunities to study at accredited post-secondary institutions in the United States. We are available to students that need support or advice throughout Pakistan through email, call, or in-person meetings. Please visit our website, www.educationusa.pk, to register for our free advising services. In Pakistan, Education USA is based at the United States Education Foundation, USEFP, which is also the Fulbright Commission in the country. USEFP promotes mutual understanding between the people of Pakistan and the people of the United States through educational and cultural exchange with offices in Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi. Other than advising, USEFP also has a programs department that administers multiple fully funded programs, including Fulbright Scholarship. You can find information on our fully funded programs on our website, www.usefp.org. USEFP also has authorized prometric testing centers in Lahore, Karachi, and Islamabad, which have now fully resumed operations. You can check our testing facilities on our website, www.usefp.org. For any questions, you can contact the relevant department at testing@usefp.org. As mentioned earlier, today's Let's Talk US Study with US session is about admission interviews. And joining us today is Ms. Shirley Be, the Director of International Admissions and International Student Advisor at Sarah Lawrence College for several decades. She reads admissions applications and travels around the world to meet students in their home countries and to talk with them about US educational opportunities, liberal arts education, and Sarah Lawrence College. Before Sarah Lawrence, she worked at Columbia University and also has an MA in teaching English as second language. Co-presenting with Ms. Shirley is her colleague, Catherine Brigham, or Brick, who's currently working in the Sarah Lawrence Office of Admission as admission assistant. She works with prospective students visiting the college, conducts interviews, and oversees the student admissions workers. Brick graduated from Sarah Lawrence in May of 2022 with a degree in philosophy and literature and hopes to obtain a PhD in philosophy after taking a few years off of school and working in admissions. I would like to thank our speakers for taking the time for our session today. A quick note before we start our session, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. For your questions, please drop them in Q&A box and do not drop them in chat box. Please note that any unrelated questions to the session will not be answered at this time. And now I will request Ms. Shirley Be and Katie to start today's session.
Okay. Good. Well, I was going to say good morning because it's morning here, but good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'm Shirley. I guess we'll just launch right in. Many of you will know what an interview is, but we'll go sort of slowly. We'll start with the basics and then we can amplify and augment later. So what is an interview at an American college or university for the purposes of admission? That's the question. And you know that college and university we use interchangeably in the United States. Well, it's an opportunity to learn about the institution. It's an opportunity to highlight your qualities, your unique qualities, your achievements, and your values, and to show interest in the school. Okay, it is the application that you've submitted, it's usually the common application, already describes, you've already written what you've done prior to applying. But the interview is a time to talk maybe a little bit less formally. It's a conversation, a real-time conversation in which you can tell us more about yourself and why you've done what you've done. It's a conversation. It's a one-on-one, so it's one person talking to you. It's not a panel of people. So it's a conversation. And usually it's a person who's dedicated to doing interviews. So oftentimes it will be a student interviewer or somebody on the staff. Sometimes it's the college representative who is in your area. But at least at the school where Brig and I work, it's oftentimes a senior interviewer, which means a person who's a senior at the college. They know the school very well. And it goes 30 to 45 minutes, sometimes 20, 25 minutes. It doesn't go longer than an hour. And what we want to stress is that it's just a conversation. So at least in our institution, we're not grilling the student. It's not a frightening test. The goal is to make the student feel comfortable, for the student to highlight themselves and to ask questions. It's we like to say that it's as much for the student as it is for us. So it's somewhat of an assessment, but it's also really just a conversation to ask questions and to talk about themselves. And we talk about our college too. So that's what the interview is.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Katie or Brig. And the next step is to talk about who should interview and then who will conduct the interview. So anyone who is a current applicant can interview. So that means that if you're applying, for example, in 2022 to 2023, if you're applying for 2023 fall, you'd be able to interview this year. If you're applying for next year, you'd want to wait until next year. This just makes sure that we can include your interview in the reading of the application and make sure everything is up to date. So if you're planning on applying in 2 years, but interview now, it would be a little silly to give someone all the information about yourself right now instead of at the time of applying. But really anyone who wants to supplement their application, as Shirley was just saying in the what, interviews are a great way to demonstrate your interest in the college or university, and supplement your application with any details about grades you've received, classes you've chosen to take, extracurriculars, anything along those lines. And then the other great reason to interview is anyone who has questions about the interview or about the institution. When I conduct interviews, I typically leave at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. You can always ask questions about the college or university through any forum you choose to do. We do information sessions and tours, but the great thing about the interview is that it's a one-on-one conversation. So any questions you have, you get to ask directly to the interviewer, which is a really special opportunity for students. And I always like to make the note that interviews will typically be optional. I don't know of many institutions that require you to interview, though there are some that do. But I think it's always a good idea to do an interview. And we'll go into sort of why you should interview later on. But it really is a great way for us as people who do the interviews and who read the applications to really get a true sense of who the applicant is. And then who will conduct the interview. It's typically going to be a current student, as Shirley mentioned earlier. We have current seniors at the college interview you. I find this is the perfect balance because it's someone who knows a lot about Sarah Lawrence, but they also will have graduated once you come to the college, if you do come to the college. So you don't have to worry about this person who gave your college interview being in your classes, which is a small but important issue. And then if it's not a current student, it might be an admissions representative such as myself or Shirley. And that's it about who will conduct the interview. So now we'll move on to when interviews happen.
Okay, when do they happen? So students are often confused about when they should sign up for an interview or do it. So at what point in the application process? Again, well, this is where it's a little confusing. This is where the websites of each college or university will be your best friend, because every college or university has a different deadline. And there are many different rounds of deadlines, but you should think in terms of the regular decision deadline, I think, and you should maybe even make a spreadsheet so you understand some for the fall of the following year. Colleges often have a January 1st or January 15th, or sometimes a February 1st deadline. Pay attention to the deadlines of the actual application. And you should aim to have your interview before the application is due. And I would say even several months before that. I wouldn't try to do it the day before. So if say that the application is due on January 15th, you can start, if you've already started your application in September or October, it's always nice to be on the early side if possible. You can start trying to make an appointment for an application. Okay, so that's a good thing. You sign up. We'll talk about that more later, but it's good to get into the system, sign up online, and get yourself ready to have that interview so that you know you're going to have that. The time, okay, so we are able, it depends on the school, but sign up for the time when you know you'll be available. We do it by Eastern Standard Time because that's where we are. So just have your calculator ready and figure out the 10-hour difference. And we will have somebody to speak to you. But most schools do accommodate for for time differences around the world, because of course we interview people in Europe, in the Middle East, in Pakistan, India, China, Latin America. So we know how to accommodate for that. But you're the one who signs up for the time zone in our time zone. So as Briggs said, when you don't try to have the interview too late, because we might have already read the application, and don't do it too early because we want to have your most current information. Okay.
Perfect. And then where do interviews happen? There are kind of a couple ways. The first and most common right now, I think, is going to be online via video chat. This, again, really depends on the institution. It could either be a Zoom call, a Skype call, or a different server. Whatever it is, they will let you know before the interview what kind of platform that'll take place. Another way is by phone. It's a little bit more simple. The college or university will, whoever's interviewing you will call you at the time of your interview and you'll talk on the phone. And then the final, which used to be a lot more common before the coronavirus, is in person. These can either happen on campus when you're touring the school, or off campus. Oftentimes they will have representatives in your area who can meet in a coffee shop or some local place and speak to you. And Shirley, I believe you have done those in the past internationally.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. And then just a couple various notes about location. You always want to make sure that your internet and or phone connection are stable when you're doing the interview. It is always a kind of frustrating thing for the interviewees and the interviewers to get on the call and then halfway through have the internet cut out. So just always make sure you're in a stable place for that, and also in a quiet and non-distracting environment. This means, a room where there's nothing else going on, and that you can completely focus on the interview. And you also want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately. We tend to forget in the age of Zoom. You're in your house, but you're doing something that is relatively important. So while you may feel that you're just sitting comfortably on your couch, it is a college interview, so you want to dress appropriately. And finally, if you're not sure where the interview is happening, you should always reach out to the admissions office. It's a good idea to check this information 24 hours before, and even double check that the link is working. This is an issue that can pop up at the beginning of the interview, that the link doesn't work or is broken, and it's easier for us to fix it before the interview happens, even if it's just 15 minutes before, as opposed to right at the time of the interview. And then I'm also going to talk about signing up for interviews before we go on to the next thing. So I just included a screenshot of what our sign up page looks like. This is just a random example, but you'll be able to easily find the link for this sign up page on any school's website. Normally the admissions pages advertise signing up for an interview very, very clearly. But you get a calendar that looks like this. The gray are dates that don't have interviews available. The green are dates that do. So you click on, say, Tuesday the 10th, you see that there's an interview available January 10th at 2 p.m. That probably would not be a convenient time for you folks to interview, or maybe it would be, I don't know. But either way, you would sign up here, you'd enter some information about yourself. After the fact, you'd receive a confirmation email with a link to the server. But it's good to note that most colleges will allow you to register online, so you don't have to call the office and set up an appointment. However, if you clicked on a date and the only time they had was at like midnight in your time, you could certainly call or email the admissions office and ask to set up a separate appointment at a more convenient time. But always check the website first, because it tends to be a lot easier that way. And now Shirley will talk about why you should interview.
Why? Well, we've a little bit gone over this already, but it provides additional context for your application. So sometimes a student will have a more complicated story, or a story that they don't necessarily want to write down, although it is part of the record, but it's just, sometimes it's easier to explain it face to face. It may be a personal situation or a medical issue or a family issue, or they might have questions about financial aid. It may be something that happened with grades, but sometimes it's just easier to talk to somebody face to face and explain it. When a student decides to do an interview with us and takes all those steps to set it up, it sends a message to us that the student is interested enough to spend the time and to research Sarah Lawrence and talk to us. So it's a good way to express your interest. It's a good way, I always think that when a student speaks with, when a prospective student speaks with a current student or an admissions worker like me or like Brig, or even an alum, but right now I don't think we're doing alum interviews, but it's a really good way for the student to understand the culture of the school. They'll begin to understand the Sarah Lawrence culture at least, but they'll get a sense of the, for lack of a better word, the vibe of the school, the values of the school, the sort of sensibility of the institution. And that, I think, is invaluable, very valuable. It personalizes the application. It's always interesting to have a conversation you know, like a picture is worth 1,000 words. A conversation is worth 1,000 words. It's a two-way street, and it's a really good way to just get a feeling for each other. So that's why we believe the students should do an interview.
What kind of questions will your interviewer ask? These are a few of my favorite questions to ask. Everyone will ask different questions, but these are also very general and give you a sense of what kind of information they might be trying to get. But it is important to note that Shirley and I have both only conducted interviews for one institution, and that is our institution, Sarah Lawrence. So I have no idea what other schools are asking. This is just an overview. But typically, they're going to ask you what some of your favorite classes are, what you're interested in academically. This is another just great example of the idea of the why of the interview, because when you submit your application, we receive a transcript, obviously, so we can see all the classes you're taking. But for me, when I see a student is taking, say, statistics, British literature, and anatomy, that gives me very little, as opposed to a student who tells me that they're really interested in data and they love Virginia Woolf and want to learn more about the human heart, right? So these conversations allow you to understand why they're taking the classes they're taking. So it's important that when people ask you, what are your favorite classes, you don't just list anatomy, statistics, British literature, but really give some detail as to why this was exciting for you. What do you do outside of school? This is a great time to talk about any sports that you play, community service you're doing, any clubs you participate in, anything like that. And again, thinking about going a little bit deeper into these interests than just listing them. Why are you interested in this school? I think that's self-explanatory, but that's something we really want to know in the interview. And it is a good idea to do some research about the school beforehand. You don't have to be an expert, but just so that your reasons for being interested in the school are, there are no good or bad reasons, but there are reasons to be interested in the school that could possibly not be something the school has. So make sure they have the programs you're looking at so that you can answer that correctly. Hand in hand with what are your favorite classes, what do you want to study in college? You don't have to know this. Going into college, it's normal to have no idea, but it's good to give an overview of what's interesting to you. And then hand in hand with that is, what are you passionate about? Maybe you want to study biology, but you also love to paint. No, again, this is all about getting a full picture of the student. And finally, do you have any questions for me? The next slide will go into some examples of good questions to ask. And one last thing I want to talk just about in terms of answering the questions is the importance of being authentic. I think that a lot of people put on a mask for college interviews. And there's a fine line to walk between putting your best foot forward and putting on a mask. And that line is sort of being appropriate, being your best self, but also speaking truly about your experience and not worrying about what to say to most impress the interviewer. Because we really want to know who you are. For example, if I ask you your favorite book, I would much rather hear your favorite novel from childhood as opposed to the dense novel that you think will impress me, unless that is your favorite book. But don't worry about impressing the interviewer. Be putting your best foot forward, and we will be impressed by that authenticity. Shirley, I'm going to pass it off to you.
That's a great point, Brig. The fine line. Obviously, you have to present yourself well, but just be yourself. I think that's the most important.
It's very important.
Just be yourself.
Yes.
Okay, what should you ask? This is, it dovetails well. Why did you choose the school? So we're asking, these are questions that the prospective student would ask the student interviewer or the representative. So that is, students will often say to a current Sarah Lawrence student, why did you choose this school? And that's a great question because, as you know, there are thousands and thousands of institutions in America. So that it's always good to get that answer. And you can find out, usually the person who interviews you, let's say it's a senior student, they will tell you what they study. And that's a really good bird's eye view that you can get about the department, what the student is studying, the kinds of courses in the program, what the student might be interested in doing later on. I mean, again, you're not there to grill that student, but you can get that student's perspective, which is invaluable. What is student life like? That is a great question. As you know, in many American institutions, it's a residential school. If it's a residential school, it's interesting to find out what campus life is really like. You know, what do students do on weekends? What do they do in the evenings? Are there films, concerts, theater productions, political action meetings, poetry readings, orchestras? What's going on at the school? And that is, you will get your best answer from the students who are there. Again, what did you study? Good question. What were some of your favorite classes? That's a great question also, because that's when everybody likes to talk about their favorite things, right? So that's a good question. Wonderful question. I think that these 4 or 5 questions will give any prospective student a very strong view onto what a campus is like. And recognize also, let's also remember that you're getting somebody's opinion. So if a student says the food is terrible, it might not be terrible. Or if the student says, if the current student says the food is great, it might not always be great. We have to remember that everything has to be balanced.
Yes, perfect. And our final slide is just a couple do's and don'ts of admissions interviews. So you should definitely show up on time or a few minutes early. That is one thing that, for me personally, really makes a difference when the student logs onto the interview right when it starts. It shows a lot of respect. And again, come prepared with questions. This goes hand in hand with the idea of showing interest in the school. Interviewing is a great step. It demonstrates that you want to take that time. And for me, it becomes very clear that a student is interested when they ask me specific questions about the college. If they don't ask me questions, I feel kind of as though they've just interviewed to get it over. And hand in hand with that is learning a couple things about the school beforehand. You do not need to be an expert by any means, but it's good to do your research before. It shows that you care about the interview. Communicate if you're going to be late or need to cancel. Things happen. If you aren't going to be there, it is much better to give us a heads up than to just not show up. Even if, say, you sign up for a time and you forget, you think it's on Tuesday, but it was on Monday. Even if that happens, still following up with an email, apologizing, saying, you know, you recognize that you missed the interview, you will try to sign up for another one. That is much better than just not showing up and never saying anything about it. Use polite and appropriate language. Again, I mentioned this earlier on. Ensure that your internet or phone connection are stable. And follow up with a thank you note. It's a small thing, but it goes a long way. I always really appreciate it, especially if you're international. This does not have to be a handwritten note. Email is completely fine, but it is a really nice touch, and means a lot to the interviewer. And then do not attend the interview with anyone else present in the room. You know, I know parents might be very curious about what happens, but this is not a time for them to be in the background, or for anyone else to be there. It should just be you. You should not interview from a location that is noisy, distracting, or otherwise inappropriate. Noisy and distracting, I think, are self-explanatory, but examples of inappropriate locations would be interviewing from like lying down in bed or with inappropriate poster in the background. Do not use your phone, other browsers on your computer, watch TV, play video games, anything like that during the interview. Doing the interview should really be the only thing you're doing at the time. And don't wear inappropriate clothing. Again, I think that one is pretty self-explanatory, but anything that you would wear to school is appropriate, I think. And yeah, I think that is the end of our slides. So we will now do a Q&A.
Umara, the sound.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much, Shirley and Katie, for such an insightful session. I hope it was helpful for our audience, and as our audience think about questions, because I'm looking at them, there's not many questions yet in. I'll be asking questions that we already have from our advisors and students that weren't able to attend this session. So my connection got lost in between. So if you've already answered this question, let me know. Otherwise, there are a few questions what kind of response are universities looking for when they are asking about strengths and weakness of a student? What kind of thinking process is behind it?
You mean, are we talking about in the interview, or are you talking about in the application, or
In the interview.
both? Okay, I think, let's see. Again, as Brig and I keep stressing, just to be authentic. So to be honest, a student might say, well, I'm too much of a perfectionist, or I'm sometimes late with we're interested in a student's assessment of themselves, or how they speak about themselves also. So I think a student should just say what they think, what they believe they're weak in, areas that could use improvement. And strengths, of course, are wonderful to talk about. A student can talk about what they're good at, what they believe they excel at, what they like. But actually, I don't usually ask that question because it's difficult. It's a difficult question. But I think a student should be prepared for all kinds of questions. So that's something that is probably worth thinking about before the interview, in case that question comes up.
So there's another question about, sorry, were you saying something? Shirley?
I do want to say, and I don't know if we touched upon this, the interviewer typically will do a write-up after the interview. So they will write, usually in some detail, but they'll write things down, and that goes electronically into the file. So we have a little tab under interview, and just notes about the actual conversation. So that's actually, I should speak for our institution where Brig and I work. We're not looking to keep students out. We're looking to be inclusive and to look at the best things that a student has to offer. So it's not like some horrible test that will say, that we're looking to deny students. We're looking for wonderful things that the student says about themselves and reasons to admit them to our institution. So that interview write-up is a very handy tool for us when we actually read the application.
Okay. Thank you. In what circumstances does a college, university alumni interview? And how is it different from the one where a university professional interviews?
That's an excellent question. I can answer that, and Shirley, you can add on if you'd like. So our institution, mostly students conduct the interview. And in my opinion, this creates a more comfortable environment for the students, because it's someone who is closer in age to you, understands just a little bit more of what you're talking about. You can feel a little bit more comfortable. And another big difference is that oftentimes a university professional may be your admissions counselor, which is the person who may read your application once it's submitted. So there is a bit more of there are a bit more stakes when you interview with the university professional. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's kind of good to make a connection with someone who's going to be so involved in your application process. But it is just something to note, is that if you interview with a student, it's oftentimes a peer. If you interview with a admissions counselor, it's someone who's still going to try to make you feel really comfortable, though. And either way, it's the interview, the format of the interview is going to be pretty much the same.
Okay, thank you. What if my interview doesn't go well? This is one question from a student. Can I request another interview?
No, you cannot interview twice. But you want to try to put your best foot forward during the interview. If you feel concerned about how your interview went, you can reach out to your admissions counselor. If a student conducted the interview, again, this is just our institution, but as I supervise the student interviewers, and so I know that I would prefer that if the interview didn't go well, the applicant reaches out to an admissions professional as opposed to one of the students. But you cannot interview twice. But the interview is not the most important part of your application. So just because you feel your interview didn't go very well, that doesn't mean you won't be admitted.
So Jabran has a question. Does the interviewer ask detailed technical questions related to previous research for a PhD position? I think this is something that is not relevant to the session, but if you guys, yeah. So Tuba Shehbaz, what area research should one do before the interview? About the institute or just the program?
Both. They should go to the website and read about the college or university and understand the basic setup of the university, and if a prospective student is interested in specific programs, say philosophy and music, they should feel free to ask detailed questions about those programs. And again, the interviewer may not have those answers, but the interviewer can connect them to somebody, or the interviewer will say very frankly, I actually don't take music courses, but I can find out more, or I can refer you to a professor or another student.
So Afan, Nadeem has a question. He's saying, hi, only one person will take interview, or it can be a group interview, like professor, senior students, admission interview altogether?
One-on-one. So in our institution at Sarah Lawrence College, it's one person, usually a senior student. That means a student who's in their last year at Sarah Lawrence. That student will interview one prospective student at a time. So it's a one-to-one conversation. And it's also important to know, I think it is, I forget because I've been in the field for so long, but I do realize that it can be intimidating for a high school student to have an interview, what feels like a very high stakes situation. It can be intimidating to talk with a stranger from a school they really want to get into, who's usually older than they are, well, who's definitely older than they are, much more experienced, is already a student or a staff member of that school. It can be very intimidating. But I will say that the people who have these jobs Brig, myself, we enjoy talking with students, and we're used to talking to high school students, so we know that that's the dynamic of the interview. We enjoy talking to students. That's what our livelihood is. So again, we're not out to get anybody. We're out to have a nice conversation, an interesting conversation to figure out whether the school is right for whether it's to a certain extent, whether it's a good fit or a good match. And we're there to help students and answer questions, to answer and to ask questions. I think, Umar, you might be, Ray, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think Umara, you might be frozen.
Connectivity.
I think Amara's internet's disconnecting, but I can speak. I can speak in her place. I'm Zain. I'm also an Education USA advisor.
Hi.
So I actually I'll ask a few questions. This is a question I recently got from somebody who got deferred from they applied for early decision and they got deferred. So now for regular decision, they were wondering if they interviewed, would that increase their chances of getting in during regular decision, because they have been deferred to the regular decision cycle.
Are you talking about for Sarah Lawrence College or for?
Just generally,
Other
it's like a
schools?
question, like it's
Okay.
happened to a few students, so they were just so it was just a question I was wondering.
Yeah, I think the student should look at the letter, the deferral letter, deferral or postponement, whatever the school's calling it. Sometimes the letter gives you options and it'll say submit additional material, additional grades. Sometimes every school is different, but schools will often say we need further grades, or we need we would like to see further grades, 7th semester grades, or we'd like to see information about papers you've written or awards you've received. At this time, please schedule an interview if possible. So it'll depend. Sometimes schools are filled already at this time and they'll say, there's no time for interviews, but you may submit a few more words about yourself. But yes, I would say the student can interview and they can get a slot. That would be certainly a thing to do.
But if they've already interviewed,
Oh, that's
they cannot interview a sec. So if you interviewed
Yeah.
for your early decision application and then you get deferred, a second interview is not really on the table.
So if as an international student, if one's English is not that good and you make some mistakes while answering the interviewer, does that affect the final decision?
So as part of the application for a student who's indicated that English is not a first language or a home language or the medium that they've used in school, we often ask for an English language assessment test, which can be IELTS, TOEFL, or Duolingo. I'm talking about all institutions in America, and every school. I'm looking at my wall because I have the tables up there. All schools have a different threshold for the number that the score that the student should have. So that's already a part of the application. But no, a few mechanical or grammar mistakes is not generally a problem. Native speakers make them all the time. So that's not a problem. If the student cannot speak English fluently to the level that they would need for academics, then that could be a problem, and that'll be noted. But again, it's not an English language test that we're administering. We're just trying to have a conversation. But I would also say, for many international students who are not US citizens, they'll have to go for a visa appointment anyway.
Mhm.
So, and then oftentimes they'll have to have the TOEFL scores or the IELTS scores, and they'll have to answer basic questions also at I believe that my understanding is that's how the interview works. The visa officer will ask some basic questions, but don't worry, we're not there to see whether they whether every single grammar question, well, every single piece of particle of grammar is correct. Don't worry about that.
Sure. So you might have answered this question during your presentation, but does questioning an interviewer a good thing? And how many questions would not be inappropriate?
Yes, questioning an interviewer is a great thing. I think that you should prioritize the interview where the interviewer is asking you questions, and hold your questions until the end. I don't know how many, I don't think there's a default number of how many questions would be inappropriate. I think that, you know, in respect to the interviewer, keep an eye on the time. So again, our interviews are typically 30 minutes long. I'm comfortable staying on for an extra 5 to 10 minutes, but say your interview is supposed to end at 2:30 and it's 2:50 and you've been asking questions for 20 minutes, that might be going a little overboard. But I think asking questions is a great thing, because if you're curious about something, there's really no better way to just ask in that one-to-one conversation. And because I mentioned this earlier, but it really shows that you sincerely want to know about the school.
Thank you.
Always remember that it's a conversation. So I would say for the student, again, it's new for the student. For people like Brigham and me, we do it all the time. We know it's a new situation for the prospective student, but as they say, know the room. It's a conversation. It's a two-way conversation, and I would say the student should not have a list of questions to reel off and to pepper the interviewer. It's not about that. It's more about getting information and having a genuine conversation. I do know that different cultures are different, right? Somebody once said I heard somebody say about an interviewer. The interviewer said to the person who was interviewing the prospective student, don't be afraid to put yourself forward. So again, it's not a brag festival or boasting, but sometimes a student who's 17 years old might feel a little bit shy about demonstrating their accomplishments. So here's a question. The interviewer might say, what do you do outside of school? And the student might say, I do music. Or I might have to prompt the student, do you do music? Do you do sports? Do you do community service? And the student might say, I do music. So I'm being very extreme. I would say something, go further with that. I do music. I actually have trained in classical singing for many years. Give enough information that the conversation can go forward, and don't be afraid to talk about yourself. That's what we're there for. Or I've done music for 10 years. I sing in concerts. I write music.
Absolutely. So this question you I think already answered, but I think Amnath and me is asking, these interviews will start after submission of application.
No, you can interview before you submit your application. Just not long before. You just have to be planning on submitting your application in the year's application cycle. But we do not look at applications before the interview. So you don't have to submit it. That's just our institution.
Yeah.
That's an important.
It's the current year. Yeah, it does get confusing because of the cycle. If you're a senior in college, so you're a senior in high school and you're applying for first year application, you should interview during your senior year or the summer before.
Oh, that's great to know.
Again, Umara, and students who are listening in, just check the website of each college or university you're applying for, because they're all a little bit different. But as Briggs said so well before, don't, people like to be early for things. Don't try to do an interview in your junior year when you're in 11th grade. That's really too early, because a lot of things happen between junior and senior year, and you'll be more formed. You'll have more to offer as you get into your senior year.
The student who's asking, I am very shy and get nervous very easily during interviews. How can I improve this situation?
Oh, have a practice interview with somebody. Do you offer practice interviews at the center? Mock interviews?
We whenever we are doing sessions, we also practice. I think having a conversation online is also a bit intimidating. Of course, in person is intimidating, but less than so, because you don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to happen, and so many things are in between, like technology and all that. So yeah, we do prepare, and I think preparation might help it a lot.
Yeah, maybe if you're and shy is fine. That's we're used to interviewing shy students who are a bit restrained. But maybe if you students can practice with each other, or with a family member, with an older sibling, with a family friend. You can practice online, and there's no such thing as a right or wrong, or a perfect interview or an imperfect interview. Just get used to talking about yourself and having a conversation.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I feel that my job as an interviewer is to make you feel comfortable. So I'm not going to be upset with you because you're nervous, because I know that it's nerve-wracking. But what we train our student interviewers to do is help you not be nervous, or even if you are nervous, which this goes back to Shirley saying that it's really not a worry if you make any grammatical mistakes, because I'm a native speaker and just said, even if you are nervous. But even if you are nervous, we are working to ask you questions that will make you feel completely comfortable and feel like you can put your best foot forward. So don't worry about being nervous, because the interviewer should work very hard to reduce those nerves.
I often start my interviews when I'm doing them in person by saying immediately, I'm not going to ask you any trick questions. I'm not going to ask, this again, I'm speaking for my institution and for me. I say to the student, I'm not going to ask you if you had dinner, who you would choose for your 3 historical figures to have dinner with. And sometimes they visibly relax, and I can see that they were going to ask that question. The student will say, but can I tell you anyway who my 3 historical people would be? I say that I'm not here to trip you up. And I often, sometimes I've asked students, are you reading any books now for pleasure? What book are you reading? And the student would freeze. And then I realized that sometimes when people ask me what I'm reading, first of all, I might not be reading a book, but I can't even think of the name of the book. I know I'm reading a book, but I can't think. So I've stopped asking that question, because especially in pandemic times, it's just hard to remember things. So I've realized that that's not always a good question to say, what book are you reading? People, even my friends, will say, I'm reading a book, but I can't remember exactly the author. So again, we're not out to get students. We're out to encourage a nice conversation.
So I think this might be, sorry, Kitty, you were saying something?
No.
Okay, so this might be in connection to the question that I just asked. There are 2 questions. One, can I substitute an interview with a TOEFL test?
Shall I answer that, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I know what the student's talking about, that the TOEFL test or the Duolingo, where it's just a student answering a question online, right? So actually, no, the answer is no. Remember, the TOEFL is oftentimes required, depending on how the student answered the English language question, official scores, or sometimes even self-reported will accept for the purpose of reading the interview, or reading the application. But it's not a substitute but the interview is not strictly required. The interview is optional. We encourage it at our institution, but it's optional. So it's not really a substitute.
Mhm. The next question is it possible for students, if it's a requirement for the university, to get it weighed, the interview requirement, to get it weighed?
I think it would depend on the institution. So again, at the school at Sarah Lawrence College, which is a small liberal arts college just outside of New York City, where Brig attended, where Brig works, where I work. At our school, it's not a requirement. So they don't have to ask for a waiver for the interview. But there might be some schools in the United States that do require the interview. And if the student cannot or will not interview for whatever reason, they should speak directly with the admissions office of that institution about a waiver. So again, we're giving you information from our school and from what we know about, mostly from what we know about our school, but what we know about interviews in general. But the best thing is to go directly to the website of the other colleges.
Okay, I think we're almost done with our time, so I'll just do one last question and then we can end our session. So my last question is, so a lot of the kids who are applying to colleges in Pakistan, they're not just applying to the US, they're also applying to the UK. And the UK universities, when they interview, their questioning is slightly different. It's more academic based, like they'll ask them specific questions. I went to liberal arts school, but I just want to like double check with you, like Sarah Lawrence, like liberal arts schools in general in the US, they would only like ask like questions about the applicant, not like anything super related to academics or like a very academic question per se. Like I've had students,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say that from what you seem to be describing about schools outside of the US, it's not going to be like a quizzing kind of question.
Yes.
I know that I studied literature and philosophy as an undergraduate student. If I have a student who is interested in literature, is interested in philosophy, I will ask them just sort of a general question: what do you like to read, or what do you find most appealing about, for example, if they mention a philosopher they like, oh, what have you read by them? What do you like about it? And then I always, as Shirley mentioned before, I always preface by saying, I'm not asking you a trick question. I'm not asking you a quiz question. I genuinely want to know, because such an important part of the small liberal arts experience is being able to carry on an academic conversation. However, if a student says, oh, I'm really interested in philosophy, I ask, what philosophy do you like reading? And they say either they have no idea, they are like, oh, I actually don't really know a lot about philosophy, I just am interested in it. I'm not going to write that down as like a negative thing. And even if I ask them, about a specific book or a specific thinker and they answer and it's just completely off base or wrong, I'm not going to write that down as a negative thing. I'm not going to say, oh, they actually don't know anything. So there definitely will be questions about academics, but they won't be so kind of technical and kind of quizzing.
Perfect. Thank you. That actually answers everything I had and like students have previously asked me. I just want to thank Katie and Shirley for joining us today. Thank you guys so much for waking up so early and doing this session. It was extremely insightful. And I definitely think I will see probably more students now signing up for interviews, hopefully.
Mock interviews, yes.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. Thank you so much. And everybody else, thank you for joining this session. If you still have questions, please email Education USA, go to our website, sign up for our advising services. And also don't forget to follow us on our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, so you can stay tuned for our other events. I hope everybody has a good evening. And I hope Shirley and Katie have a good rest of their morning. Okay,
Thank
goodbye,
you so much for
everybody.
joining, please. Yeah, thank you both for joining today. Thank
Our
you.
it was our great pleasure.
Yeah, it was a
Nice to meet all of you.
great pleasure. Thank you all.
Greg, thanks so much.
Yeah, of course.
Umar, I'll stay on. We can both stay on if you want. But
Yeah, I'll wait for the participants to go. Thank you.
this was great. I was saying to Brig,